Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Thanks for joining us. Much of the world sees America's pullout from Afghanistan as a geopolitical disaster. For some in the Islamic world, it has a much different meaning.
Extremist Muslims see it as the fulfillment of an Islamic prophecy that begins with the raising of black flags and ends with the conquest of Jerusalem. Chris Mitchell explains.
The Taliban Twitter page carried this message: black flags will rise from Khorasan and nothing will be able to return them. The Taliban are now flying their white flags, but black flags come during a time of war.
This is very important. I haven't heard this talked about in the mainstream media at all. But if we look at some of the main end-time prophecies within Islam, I mean, one of the biggest prophecies, there's a prophecy that says armies carrying black flags will come from the area of the east, or Khorasan.
Khorasan is an ancient land that includes modern northwest Pakistan, eastern Iran, and all of Afghanistan. Joel Richardson wrote the best-selling book, The Islamic Antichrist. He explained the importance of this prophecy on the recent CBN webinar, Afghanistan, What's Next After the U.S. Pullout?
It says an army will come from Khorasan carrying black flags. And then it says this: if you see them, give them your allegiance, even if you have to crawl over ice, because this is the army of the Mehdi, or in English, you could just say the Mahdi, the vice regent of Allah. So this is one of their biggest end-time prophecies.
Afghanistan is the heart of Khorasan.
Sheikh Imran Hossein, a Muslim expert on Islamic prophecies, connects the U.S. pullout in Afghanistan to this prophecy.
What is happening in Afghanistan is validating the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that a Muslim army is destined to come out of Afghanistan, of Khorasan, and no one will be able to stop it until it reaches Jerusalem.
The prophecy points here to Jerusalem as the final goal of the Mahdi's army, where it expects to plant its flags there on the Temple Mount.
Jerusalem is the barometer. Jerusalem is the epicenter. Jerusalem is the goal. That's Satan's target. That's where Jesus is going to return, reestablish the throne of his father David, and rule the world from. Satan's very well aware of that.
While some Muslims may not know about these prophecies or even agree with them, Richardson says the world should understand how parts of the Islamic world perceive the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan.
As Christians, of course, we don't give any credence to Islamic prophecy. It's not inspired by God. It's largely inspired by Satan. But the point is this: it gives us a glimpse into the playbook of the enemy. Muslims, many Muslims that are very, very well aware of their own prophecies, they see this as the fulfillment of Islamic prophecy. And there is power in prophecy. It's a tremendous recruiting tool.
The Taliban see themselves as this army, and the ISIS branch in Afghanistan calls itself ISIS-K, K for Khorasan. Given the unfolding developments, it's likely Afghanistan will once again become a magnet for Muslims around the world to join the black flags of Khorasan. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, this is not a story you're going to see on any other news network because they just don't understand what is the ideology behind this. When you look at the withdrawal of American forces from Iraq under the Obama administration, what rose up in northern Iraq was a group called ISIS and the Islamic State. Some call it ISIL, which includes this word Levant. They were claiming Jerusalem as part of the territory they wanted to conquer. They claimed they had a direct descendant of the prophet as their leader, al-Baghdadi. And so you had to pledge allegiance to him because he's now declaring his caliphate. Well, under the Trump administration, ISIS was defeated, and now it's morphed. But in that morphing, they're saying, well, we're actually now fulfilling Islamic prophecy. So what are those prophecies? There will emerge from Khorasan black banners, which nothing will repel until they are set up in Jerusalem. So we've all seen the ISIS flag. It's a black banner. That's because of the prophecy. They didn't just sort of invent this. They said, we want to go back to that prophecy. And in the raising of our black banner, What they're saying to all Muslims around the world is you must come and pledge allegiance to us. And here's that prophecy. When the black flags come from Khorasan, go to them, even if you have to crawl on snow, for among them is the Khalifa from Allah, the Mahdi. Now, who's the Mahdi? Well, that's the prophet to come, and that's the signal for the end of the age. Iran has their own version of it. ISIS has its own version of it. That has been around Islamic circles for a long time. You go back to the struggle between the British Empire and the Sudanese about 130 years ago. In that, you had someone who declared himself the Mahdi, and he defeated the Brits in Khartoum and put the British general's head on a stake and put it on the city walls. These prophecies have great power, not from anything divine, but from an ideological point of view. And when you're a Muslim and you see the black flag, then you're then required to crawl over snow and ice in order to join that group. So here we had the withdrawal from Iraq. ISIS was set up. We now have the withdrawal from Afghanistan. What comes in to fill that place? ISIS-K, and they're being very specific with that. We are the Islamic State of Khorasan, and we're flying a black flag. That means something very significant for Muslims around the world. I want you to know this. I want you to see behind the headlines what's really going on, what's the ideology that's driving this terrorism. In other news, the U.S. State Department called its recent negotiations with the Taliban, if you can believe this, candid and professional. Human rights advocates say the Taliban is brutally cracking down on women, religious minorities. It's also threatening to resume executions, amputations. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. As Islamic extremism returns to Afghanistan under Taliban rule, many faith communities are hiding in the shadows, bracing for a wave of persecution. Religious freedom advocates are taking steps to help them survive, even as the Taliban and ISIS fight for control. CBN's Brody Carter is following new plans to keep Afghan Christians and other religious minorities safe.
Since the Taliban took control in August, Afghanistan's economy is on the brink of collapse. Women's freedoms have been stripped, and people of faith, especially Christians, fear the worst is yet to come. Yusuf hopes world leaders will use the worsening enemy and the Taliban's political desires as bargaining chips to protect religious minorities.
Since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan in mid-August, the Taliban has intimidated, threatened, and targeted leaders from religious minority communities.
2 months into the Taliban's rule, young fighters fill the streets of Kabul. Peace and stability are silenced by violence, including targeted kidnappings and destruction at places of worship.
In May 2021, at least 85 people, most Hazara Shia female students, were killed in bombings outside a high school.
Members of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom sounding the alarm and sharing the plight of religious minorities.
2 weeks ago, the Taliban's former head of religious police, now in charge of prisons, announced that executions and amputations would resume.
The Afghan government operates as a Sunni Islamic republic, which pressures citizens to adhere to Muslim traditions. That leaves a sliver of the populations, such as Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, and Baha'i, living in constant fear of the Taliban's harsh punishment, including execution, simply for believing otherwise.
One of us is always awake during the night, always walking around and praying. So if the Taliban should come and knock on our door, we should alert everyone.
Yusuf says Afghanistan's religious minorities are nearly extinct, noting the last Jew fled the country in September. The organization hopes to use the Taliban's economic problems and desire for international recognition as an open door to restore peace and equal rights for all people in the country.
And how the United States will partner with other countries to use those leverage points as a way of encouraging the Taliban to uphold their side of the agreement that was agreed in the peace process related to inclusive government, related to human rights and also related to protection of security.
If you'd like to tangibly help Afghanistan, Yusuf recommends helping the tens of thousands of refugees now living here in the States. Landlords can rent to Afghan refugees without a credit check. You can sign up to drive a refugee or even help teach English to those living in your communities. And most importantly, to pray for those facing persecution in Afghanistan. I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
Some helpful tips there. Thank you, Brody. Well, here at home, oil and gas prices are surging, hitting highs not seen in about 7 years. Gas prices now topping $3 a gallon, with the national average at $3.26. Analysts blaming pandemic-related supply backups and Hurricane Ida. Also, U.S. oil prices going over $80 a barrel, a high not seen since 2014. President Biden has urged OPEC to increase its output. Critics, though, point out he's cut back on domestic oil production, shutting down the Keystone Pipeline and putting a moratorium on new drilling leases. Well, the Biden Justice Department again urged the courts Monday night to step in and suspend a new Texas law that bans virtually all abortions in the state. The latest attempt comes 3 days after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reinstated the law in response to a district judge who earlier suspended it. The law bans abortions in Texas once a heartbeat is detected, usually at 6 weeks and before some women even know they're pregnant. The law's future could be decided in the upcoming days, and the Supreme Court could eventually be forced to decide whether it is constitutional. Now to the fight against COVID-19 and new hopeful signs things are improving. The FDA may soon approve a new antiviral pill to treat the virus, and as CBN's Jenna Browder reports, a decision about booster shots from Moderna and J&J could be made as soon as this week.
There's reason to be hopeful with COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, and deaths all declining, including infections among kids. Add to that new medical advances, and it's welcome news for Americans. Still, experts warn we are not out of the woods.
And it's about 50% effective at preventing hospitalization.
Among those medical advances, the first antiviral pill designed to fight COVID. Merck seeking FDA emergency authorization. The drug maker says in its trials, the drug cut the risk of hospitalization in half for people at risk for severe disease. The pill can be taken at home, 4 pills every 12 hours for 5 days. Still, with transmission rates high nationwide, experts continue to encourage the vaccine.
But remember, the vaccine is virtually 99% effective at preventing hospitalization. You'd much rather prevent getting the illness than treating it once you've already gotten it.
Vaccine mandates, though, are still unpopular in many places. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott, in an executive order, is now banning mandates by all entities, including private businesses. And in California, the man in charge of the country's largest sheriff's department says he's not enforcing vaccine requirements for his employees.
I'm not forcing anyone. The issue has become so politicized, there are entire groups of employees that are willing to be fired and laid off rather than get vaccinated.
Thursday and Friday, the FDA will also review data on vaccine boosters from Moderna and J&J. If the agency gives the green light, they'll go to the CDC for final approval next week. And another symbol of hope as some aspects of life begin to return to normal. 18,000 determined athletes at the first Boston Marathon in 2.5 years.
Well, we were pumped. We're excited to finally have it back and, back to the way it used to be.
And each runner had to show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. The same requirements will be in place later this month for the Philadelphia and New York marathons. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Jenna. Gordon, back to you.
Well, it's a real shame it's become so politicized and so divided. And as a result, the medical science can't surface and we can't come to any kind of reasonable decision as individuals on what to do. And it's so divided and there's so much information on both sides of it that you really can't see your way through. I'm vaccinated. I haven't so far had any adverse effects from that vaccination, but I guess for those who are anti-vax, well, you haven't really seen it yet. If you're not vaccinated, I really encourage you to please isolate. You do not want to get into this disease, even at just a 2% death rate. Some are saying 3%. You really want to gamble on your future. And gamble on your health. That is something that is, for me personally, unthinkable. At the same time, it's unthinkable to think that there would be a mandate that comes from the government. It's unthinkable that there would be a mandate that comes from an employer. If you're front-facing into the public, I can see if you're not vaccinated, you shouldn't be in that position because you're going to be, as part of your job, routinely exposed to the virus. That, in turn, leads to legal issues, and we've already seen a California company already being sued by an employee who claims that they got the virus at employment and then took it home, and it's one of the horror stories. The spouse died. The spouse contracted it and died. So litigation is behind everything these days and all of our decisions. How can we see a way forward? But the real shame, this thing should be medical science. It's got nothing to do with politics.